Welcome to today's talk. My name is Alexandra Lieben. I'm the chapter co-head with Doris Berger, our speaker today of the Pacific South chapter, and it is my distinct pleasure to introduce her. Doris Berger is Vice President of Curatorial Affairs at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures in Los Angeles. Prior to that, she was a Getty Postdoc Fellow, a curator at the Skirball Cultural Center, and the director of the Kunstverein Wolfsburg in Germany. At the Skirball, Doris curated the exhibition Light Noir, Exiles and Emigres in Hollywood, 1933 to 1950. At the Academy Museum, she co-curated the inaugural exhibition Stories of Cinema and Backdrop and Invisible Art, and the touring exhibition Regeneration, Black Cinema 1898 to 1971, the subject of her talk today. Doris has written and co-edited numerous catalogs, essays, and articles. She holds a master's degree from the University of Vienna and a PhD from the University of Art in Braunschweig, Germany. The title of today's talk is The Making of the Exhibition, Regeneration, Black Cinema, 1898 to 1971. Welcome, Doris. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. And I'm so excited to be here in our distinguished group of Aszinaten and Aszinatinnen. And I am really excited to show you a little bit part of my process and our process for the exhibition Regeneration Black Cinema 1898 to 1971. Before I start speaking in English, I should ask, should I speak English or German? You started in English, so my brain went into English, but any preferences?
We just talked about this and we thought for the YouTube channel, it might be good if it's English.
English, all right. I'll keep it that way. Yeah, sounds good to me too. I was hoping to show you even an updated presentation where I actually uploaded some of the amazing press that we have received for our exhibition, which was such a wonderful journey for Ria L. Combs, who is the co-curator with me for the exhibition, and myself. But the internet, my connection doesn't allow me to do so. So please bear with me with still great images. I can talk to more in our Q&A afterwards. This exhibition started out many years ago, and it's an exhibition that is still up at the Academy Museum of Motion Pictures in Los Angeles until July 16th. So if you haven't seen it yet, please come and see it. And it started out as a great long research project on exploring appreciated and lesser known histories of American cinema, and in particular, in this case, cinema that relates to Black representation and Black film production. And all this project came about with an archival find, and I want to mention this here because we are scientists here and all have studied so many years, and we all know what it is and how it feels when you are in an archive and suddenly have a eureka moment, you know, or hurrah or oh my God moment, which I did at the Margaret Herrick Library in, I believe, 2016, together with assistant curator Raul Guzman, where we found posters and lobby cards of so-called race films. Those films are films made for the Black community between the mid-teens to the late 1940s, with an all-Black cast, and made in all genres. It was kind of a parallel film production in the United States between that time that, as we all know, was a time where this country was segregated. And I had no idea about any of these films. And I really felt it was a big shame that I didn't know anything about this amazing film production, and which kind of proved and showed so beautifully that African-American actors in particular were able to play all kinds of roles. Of course, they were not just mummies and butlers that we were seeing in Hollywood during that time. And that kind of really was a moment where I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And then I started digging, and obviously I found books by other scholars who have been working on this topic for years before me, thank God. And so I was able to read up pretty fast. But this started the project from 2016 until 2022 when we opened. So 6 years really. Many grant applications in between, and we received National Endowments of the Humanities, National Endowment of the Arts grants. We received the Sotheby's Prize. Many good moments that allowed us to continue. Somebody please mute, if that's okay. Thank you so much. Allowed us to continue this project. During a time, and I want to mention this, well, actually the museum didn't exist yet. So the museum was built, the Museum of Motion Picture was built and opened in September of 2021. And I really immediately, once I realized I got green-lighted for this project on Black cinema, I had no idea about the time frame yet or anything else, but I wanted to go in a deeper exploration. I knew very soon that I did not and shouldn't do this alone as a white person from Europe in particular. There were areas and elements that I could never see or feel the same way. So I went on a search to find an African-American curator who has been working in this field for some time before, and called Ria Combs, who at that time was at the National Museum of African-American History and Culture, the photo and film curator. I also visited other curators, but Ria and myself, we kind of hit it off, so to speak, and joined this journey together since 2017. So she has been intrinsic part of this project from the almost very beginning on, but at least for the entire conceptualization of this project and implementation. So we had Ria out, who lived and still lives in DC many times, and even on our construction site, as you can see here, together with Raul Guzman and me. And then another thing we decided is to form an advisory group for a project of that magnitude and that scale. We felt like we really should be in close dialogue with scholars that have been written and are researching on various topics related to this subject matter. And we formed as advisory group with scholars and filmmakers, and both were really as important to us. So scholars, obviously, clearly for our perspective, to make sure we are hitting the right notes, we are up to date in our scholarship, but then also filmmakers to hear as aspects and from the practicing filmmakers of today. And we see here Charles Burnett. Do you see my cursor when I move around? I think so, right? Yeah. Charles Burnett here is one of the filmmakers, which was so great. We also had Ava DuVernay as another filmmaker, and Charlotte Lynch, a documentary filmmaker here as well. So this was also on the construction side very early on. We had our first advisory team meeting. We had a few of them. This was still the time when the museum was not physically open yet. And then we started digging, Ria, Raul, and myself in particular, for a long time in various archives, and I listed some of them here, that allowed us to explore this rich topic. Archival pictures, you all are familiar with those. The areas and the archives are so different sometimes too, right? We're all familiar with it. Some of them are really well organized and some of them are less so well organized. And it was really exciting for us to, to go from MoMA to Black Film Center Archive to Western costumes and look at various materials related to the subject matter of African-American cinema production. That also led us to different trips. And one very key component was to be at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, which is part of the New York Public Library in Harlem. Fantastic resource if you're interested in this topic. But then, of course, part of a research quest is also to learn and to be together and to learn from each other, in particular for Ria and myself, to get to know each other better, to visit exhibitions together. And this was a highlight of our research phase, to go to Château des Milandes, which is in the south of France, in the Dordogne, and was the castle of Josephine Baker, which she became a story in our exhibition. And then we did research also in art exhibitions that related to Black production, which we felt was as important as the film present, maybe not as important, but was also important in relationship to our exhibition. And you'll see it's because we included contemporary art into our film exhibition narrative, where we felt like it is kind of fascinating to think about this in terms of Black visual culture, and not just about film history. And if you expand this notion, then you kind of have a wider range of dialogues that you can have between the visual arts and film cultures. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. And then, of course, shaping an exhibition, that's such a long process. And I have a few pictures that are process oriented. I thought is fun to share. For example, Post-its, right? Like how do you organize your ideas? You put your ideas up on the wall by hand. I'm still very tactile, as much as I love digital technology, but there's something about tactility as well when you create exhibitions. And for me, exhibition making has so much to do about telling stories in space. So it's a spatial experience. And in this case, and in other cases too, I find it always really important that the stories we tell are grounded in scholarship or are grounded in deep research, yet are made accessible for a wider audience. So this is part of our process with our Shwada Aryal, who is our SVP for exhibition planning and design. And we still had a classic old school model with, where we placed the objects once we had them into our rooms to come. Another key component for the exhibition was, and the title hints at that, regeneration. We wanted to regenerate content, lost and forgotten histories in relation to African American participation in American cinema. And that meant objects as well as films. Throughout our process, we found costumes, and in particular, this one in the middle with a private collector. And it's a costume worn by Lena Horne in the film Stormy Weather from 1943. And that costume really needed a little extra care, which we went on to and were able to conserve it. And it is in our exhibition in a beautiful new shine right now. Also, these boots we found at the Autry Museum, which were from a film from 1937, Harlem on the Prairie. And that film was considered lost, actually. And what was fascinating, this is a film still from this film that you see here, is that in our own archive at the Academy Film Archive, we actually were finding film prints, 16 millimeter, that were considered lost. People knew about these films, but haven't seen them for a very long time and didn't know where they could see them. So we applied for different grants and received 2 NEA grants in for our film archive to restore these films and then digitize them. So that means now all these films, Harlem on the Prairie, Reform School, Mr. Washington Goes to Town, you can see now also in the big movie theater. And NAMAC, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, where Ria was at the time, did the same thing. And she found a film from 1971 that not has been seen since 1971 because it did not get any distribution. And that film was also restored and is now available for theatrical screenings. Regeneration action, that's how we call this process. A few pictures from the installations. I don't have very many, but just to give you a few hints, because it's always fun to see how something is being built. This is the title wall for our exhibition at the museum. And it just shows like how many hands and people it needs to build an exhibition. This is just a portion of our team, installation teams, as they are installing posters, photographs, artworks in our exhibition. And then also, of course, as we all know, we love books. So do I. And Ria and I were able to publish a catalog with a heavily illustrated catalog with all new texts commissioned for this book and interviews that we created with filmmakers. This is also a few process images from interviews we did with contemporary filmmakers. I mentioned before we included contemporary art into the exhibitions as objects. What we did for the book is we included contemporary filmmakers' perspectives through interviews into the book. And that was another way for us to span the past and the present into a wider bridge the past and the present, rather. This was an interview with Barry Jenkins, who did Moonlight, Charles Burnett, who did Killer of Sheep in the 70s, interviews. And then COVID hit, obviously. And as we all know, we had to pivot. So all our interviews were now on Zoom, just for us, little memento mori pictures from the process of as we were creating this book. With documentary filmmaker Dawn Porter, filmmaker, director and producer Ava DuVernay, and Julie Dash, amazing filmmaker, Daughters of the Dust, seminal Black film. And then we were working still during pandemic time when we finished the book. So we couldn't really sit without masks for many hours, as we all know, in one room together. So invited Ria to come to Los Angeles, and we continued working in our home safely, in my home safely, rather than in the office, which was another way to pivot, to make it fun also while we had to do our job. And then this is when the book was done at the presentation at the Regeneration Summit in February, which was really exciting. We had a book signing, which was super fun. This is with Ria Combs and Charla Lynch on the other side. And now I'm going to give you a few insights into the exhibition. Some of you have been already at the museum, I know, so please bear with me if you have seen the exhibition already, but I know not all of you have, so I would like to take this opportunity to give you a brief walkthrough through a virtual walkthrough through the exhibition as well. As I mentioned before, Regeneration, Black Cinema 1898 to 1971 highlights Black participation in American cinema. And you might ask yourself, why are these weird titles here? And indeed, at the beginning, we called it 1900 to 1970. We knew very early we didn't want to go further than the 70s because it was kind of the cusp of Blaxploitation. And Blaxploitation is film genres that tell Black stories from a commercialized perspective in Hollywood, which created lots of jobs for Black musicians and actors. However, the stories sometimes became a bit more stereotypicized, so to speak, and we wanted to end before this moment happened. That was 1971, where a lot of film came out still independently produced that told Black stories, and then at the cusp, and then Shaft came out, and Superfly and Coffee, you might know some of these films. All of them super great soundtracks, actually, if you're interested in that. But that's the reason why we wanted to end there. And then 1898 was very clear at some point because the reason was this. This is an image from the first found film, and that was found in 2017, actually, throughout our research phase of the project. It's the film from 1898 called Something Good, Negro Kiss. It's in reference of an Edison film called The Kiss from 1896, and a very early proof that African-American performers were always part of American cinema, and also in dignified ways. And in particular, that was an important beat we wanted to take right at the beginning of our exhibition. We see here two vaudeville performers, Gertie Brown and Saint Suttle, who are kissing on screen in dignified poses, in dignified outfits. No stereotypization here, but just pure joy and performance, like a performance of courtship, so to speak, on screen, captured on screen in 1898. So that became super exciting to us, and we were able to show this. This film actually was found at USC in the archive here in Los Angeles. Can you believe it? And then another piece of this film, very short, only a few seconds, was also found in Norway, which was it's still a mystery why it came to Norway, but that was fascinating to us too, because they proved that this film circulated internationally. And then we combined this with a contemporary artwork. This is a piece by Glenn Ligon called Double America 2. And we really love this piece because it references the double consciousness in the United States that W.E.B. Du Bois so wonderfully talked about already around the same time, 1903, of an African-American experience is always two sides of an experience, an African-American experience as well as an American experience. And they are not always the same experiences, as we know. And so that kind of became like a poetic opener for our exhibition. I don't show you all the artworks now, but I walk you through the different galleries briefly, and then hope we have enough time for questions as well. The next gallery is on early cinema. That is probably the most challenging space in our exhibition, where we really wanted to tackle stereotypes that have been created early on through narratives in books, for example, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And here we have the original copy from the 1850s here of the book, but also we have a deconstruction of that narrative by the artist Kara Walker in her famous silhouette piece that's called The Death of Uncle Tom and the Allegory of Eve in Heaven. And we have different stories here that relate to the challenges African-American performers and filmmakers had to face from very early on, the 19-teens on up to sometimes even today. And one was performance practices that came from the minstrel stage, such as having to perform in blackface, which was also the case for Black performers, not just for white performers who wanted to mock and mimic Black characters, but even Black performers had to perform in blackface. And we have a case study on Bert Williams in our exhibition. Then we, which we can't see here right now, but then we also talk about the film, The Birth of a Nation, film from 1915, which at the time and for many, many decades was hailed as a technical masterpiece, which it still was from the time. It's by D.W. Griffith, but at the same time, very often it was not talked about the messaging that this film brought to the foreground, which was very clearly a messaging of white supremacy. The film is based on a book called The Klansman. It was called The Birth of a Nation, and it had all kinds of racist tropes and stereotypes you can imagine, with the pinnacle of it all as the Ku Klux Klan taking over the country and winning over the United States legislative body in the film. And so we talk about this side of the film, but also we show a pamphlet that from 1915 on, when the film came out, the film was protested against immediately by the NAACP and other organizations. So this was the moment for us to educate our audience how many multifaceted challenges Black filmmakers had to face in this country. And that is the next gallery becomes like hopefully even more powerful with that knowledge in mind, to understand how empowering and how important it was for Black filmmakers to make their own films. And not to rely just on Hollywood film productions at that time that did not offer many opportunities for Black performers, or if so, they were very often stereotyped as mammies or maids or butlers. In these films, so-called race films, films made by and for a Black audience with an all-Black cast in all genres. You had films like adventure films, to musicals, to westerns, to dramas, all kinds of genres you can imagine. And these posters, I mentioned that before, were my eureka moment at the beginning of this project, where I realized, oh my God, I don't know any single film on this list that I see here, and the posters are evidence of these film productions that were really, really amazing and proved so much and showed and showcased so many talents in African in the African American for the African American experience, but also talents in American cinema that they were not able to showcase in the same way in mainstream Hollywood. And some of these actors, for example, Lena Horne here, also were able to have a career in Hollywood, but some only had a career in the independent film world during that time, but the 1910s to the late 1940s. So we showcase different case studies here for different production companies, different distribution companies. We have a film camera from the 1920s here. The earliest poster here is this one. The big one is from 1919. It's really, really amazing to see. We also went to great efforts to restore these posters. Not all of them were in best of shapes. So that was really great too, that paper conservation was able to put in action to regenerate these amazing posters. And then again here, we included one more artwork by Gary Simmons called Balcony Seating Only. And that big sculpture references a balcony that indicated the movie-going experience was separated during that time. As I mentioned before, and we all know this country was segregated until the mid-late 60s, actually. And so during the time of these films, Black people could not see the films with a white audience at the same time. Or if they could, it would depend on where you are. If you would have to sit in a different area, for example, only at the balcony, and that would be designated to you to go up to the balcony, so you could only sit up there. Sometimes films were shown in separate cinemas in different buildings, actually, or at different times of the day, the so-called midnight rambles. And we have here different photographs. This one references actually a cinema that the artist was inspired by to create the sculpture. And and that was like an important moment too for us not to forget this history in this country. And so we put this sculpture here, and then here where you see the blue light, we lead you into a cinema where you can see some of the restored film titles that you saw some of the posters of just a moment ago. Yeah, this is Reform School from 1939. I want to highlight this because I was so excited when we saw this film in our archives. This is Louise Beavers that we see here. Louise Beavers had a big career in Hollywood, but only as a supporting actress, never as a lead actress, and most of the time only having to play maids. So in this film from 1939, and imagine this is the year, the big Hollywood year, where we have The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Stagecoach, like big movies. This is the same year this film came out, where Louise Beavers is the boss of a prison. And she wanted to put in prison reform. And I mean, a topic that is super relevant today, if you see that film even. She wanted to change and to create a different transition for the people who were in prison and how they could find work getting out of prison. And she became the boss of their prison, was able to affect change through her tenacity, strong will, and persuasive power. And so you could see that a little bit already in this film still, of what a magnificent role she had. And again, this proves that she could have had any role she wanted, because she was a fantastic actress, also in Hollywood. Okay, then the next picture, we are going into a different gallery here, and you see now the mood is changing, right? We also changed the floors in the gallery. We created a wallpaper. We wanted like a mood of a nightclub stage. Harlem had amazing nightclub scene in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. And it became also at the brink of sound in film, which was 1927 onward, became really a moment where even Hollywood needed more talents. And we all know we have lots of great black singers, musicians and dancers, and became like a casting ground, the Harlem nightclub stage, for people who then were afforded roles in Hollywood as well. And we have a wonderful example here, seeing Freddie Washington in the middle of this with Duke Ellington and his orchestra in a film called Black and Tan from 1927, a musical. And so this became one moment where we could show transitional moments where African-American performers and musicians were afforded different opportunities in Hollywood as well. One moment we wanted to look abroad as well, and you saw our research pictures from France a moment ago. This is a case study on Hollywood, on Josephine Baker, and we really wanted to do that because by looking outside of our country, we also learned something about our country. And in particular, in the case for Josephine Baker, we felt it was a great case study for this topic. She was a great dancer and a singer and performer and actress, who made her career in France, and in France only. She moved there in 1925, even though she's mostly known for her performance in the Banana Skirt from the 1920s. And obviously she was also objectified and exoticized on stage in France. However, she was afforded and she was able to turn this around and created her own stardom out of it. And she became like a superstar in France. In the 1930s and 40s, she was a lead actress in movies. And we see a film still here. And also we show here that, trying to find this is a film still, but we show here that she was on the cover of magazines. These were big cinema magazines in France. And so this is something that would not have happened in the United States. You could not see a Black performer on a cover of a magazine, of a mainstream cinema magazine in the United States in the 1930s or 40s. So that was a moment that allowed us to see what could have been possible as well through the great talent that we had in this country. And then one aspect that I was also super excited about is to discover a cinematic history that I personally didn't know anything about, and neither did my co-curator, Ria Combs. We learned lots about soundies. Soundies are short musical films, 3 minutes long, way before MTV ever existed, in the 1940s. And they were shown in these machines, in these jukeboxes, basically. You put in a dime here, and you were able to choose to play 8 different soundies at a time. So each week you would get a different reel if you were a sounding machine owner, and you were a sounding machine. You could own a sounding machine or rent a sounding machine if you had a restaurant, a tavern. So they were standing in public places, and was like cinema culture beyond the cinema before we had TV. And it was just a wonderful moment of independent film productions that showcased swing music, jazz, dance performances, tap dance performances, a cappella performances, and again, as so many moments in American history, this is, of course, also has a challenging component to it in relation to race relations. As we learned, if you were owner from a sounding machine, you receive a reel of soundie of 8 soundies every week. So you always have new content to show. But then very often, if at all, only the last film on the reel would be one of a Black performer, and sometimes none of them. And the reason for this is because in the South, they would cut that out. Actually, they wouldn't even show it. And what we then decided for our exhibition to create a reel and find soundies of only Black performers, and create a reel of 8 soundies that runs in a loop in our exhibition, which is really a great hit. People start dancing in front of it sometimes. It's really cute. Our next gallery looks more into Hollywood film production and musicals, and into stars and icons of Black performers that had a career in Hollywood as well. And we created a glamour wall here. On the website, we have even more than here, but this was a great opportunity for us to highlight the beautiful actors and actresses during the time. And that was an experiment, and I'm really happy to report that it really worked super well. This is an AR experience as well. So you don't see a lot of information here, right? You just see the pictures. On the left side here, we have like a grid. If you don't want to use your phone, you can learn who is who and from what year the picture is and the credit line. But you don't learn much about the person. If you want to learn a bit more, there's a QR code next to it. You can click on it, and it brings you to that space where you hold your phone up in front of these pictures, and little dots appear. And then you can click on a dot, and pop-ups, you see on your phone a pop-up of a picture of this person, a short biography of a person, and a filmography. So you can learn and choose a little bit of whom you would like to know more about. And that was a great opportunity for us to engage in a playfulness with our visitors and offer more content without cluttering the walls too much. And then here you saw this dress before in a box. This is Lena Horne's dress as it shines in our exhibition. And this is from Stormy Weather, 1943. And this is Sammy Davis Jr.'s costume from Porgy and Bess from the 1950s. And then here we'll see it again with a big projection at the moment of musicals, in Hollywood musicals. At the moment, we'll see Dorothy Dandridge and Belafonte here in Carmen Jones. That's a very beloved montage as well that people just really enjoy watching. We also included home movies because they show you the private side of people. They are not made for public consumption necessarily. They were like, we all have our own home movies as well, maybe, or some of us often were shot in 8mm or other formats at that time. And so we are able to show a little bit of social history background of some of the actors and actresses that we feature on the glamour wall. And then, of course, we talk about Hattie McDaniel, who was the first Black actress and actor in American history to win an Oscar. She won this Oscar for Gone with the Wind, a role she played called Mammy, and it was a Mammy role in this film. And it was a complicated role. She did a stellar job, and it was even more complicated for her experience, the way how she had to experience winning in her Oscar, the first Black person ever to win an Oscar, which was at the Academy Awards ceremony at the Coconut Grove in 1940, which was segregated as well, is that she was not allowed to sit at the same table as the rest of the cast, who also were nominated. And then she wins this Oscar, and we have her speech here, and you see a still, which is really arresting and powerful, and I always get goosebumps knowing that context and how what she might have felt, and being able to give a speech in a public moment like that. And then we move into a different gallery that's called Freedom Movements, where we look more into the 50s and 60s, documentary films and narrative feature films, and also look into actors that were activists during that time, such as Paul Robeson, Harry Belafonte, Ruby Dee, Ossie Davis. So we have exhibition, and we have objects of that relate to these actors, and Sidney Poitier as well. And that showcase their film career, but also showcase how they engaged in the civil rights movement. And then the final gallery here is one where we highlight 5 Black directors with each just one piece, one work, to showcase the rich production of Black film directors during the late 60s, early 70s. We have William Greaves here. Symbiote-Psychotaxiplasm Take 1 is his film. It's a really meta film, a film about a film and filmmaking, fascinating. Then documentary filmmaker Madeleine Anderson's film, I Am Somebody. The film that has been restored, Black Chariot, and has not seen since 1971 by Robert Goodwin. A film called The Learning Tree, 1969 by Gordon Parks, who would end up making Shaft as well. But this was his first film, and it was actually in 1969 the first film ever directed by a Black director and produced by a Hollywood studio. So it took until 1969 to be able to do that. And then finally on the left, Melvin van Peebles with his classic Sweet Sweetback Badass song. And that is kind of really at the cusp of blaxploitation cinema. But in this moment in time, it's still produced by the filmmakers, and the stories that tell and how they tell the stories is really still their own choice. And that's why we really talk about filmmaking agency in this gallery. Yes, and that is the exhibition, like a brief walkthrough. And I'm so curious if you have questions of things I haven't addressed or haven't talked about, things that were not clear.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's a traveling exhibit, right?
Yes.
So where does it go now? And is it going to be embedded in a larger conversation about what the exhibit means and what it showcases? Do you know what I mean? Is there a public forum around it or discussion groups or something?
Mm-hmm. So first answer, it is going next to the Detroit Institute of Art Museum in Detroit. Will be there in February of 2024. And then we hope it will go to New York. So it's not confirmed yet, but fingers crossed, it should be confirmed soon after that in the fall of 24. In terms of a larger discussion, we had a summit at the museum. So I had these other pictures that kept on crashing on the PowerPoint in February at the Academy Museum, 3 days, which was exhilarating, really, and celebrated Black excellence, really, in our culture. Film is just one component, and as we know, film has many components to it. So, but we also had musicians, school groups, food vendors, and a lot of talks by scholars and filmmakers. So that was a conversation that we spearheaded at the Academy Museum. And then there was a film program. We had actually 3 types of film programs already. Some were the restored films were being shown in a movie theater, very often with introductions. One time we invited Maya Cade to do, who is the Black Film Archive founder, to program a series that was called, that was about Black love and joy. So she curated that exhibition with an introduction to each film. And then we had a centennial retrospective on Ruby Dee and Dorothy Dandridge as well. And the last portion, the 4th film program, will happen in July, where we show also more contemporary films and relate it back to the content of the exhibition. So that is in terms of conversation that we spearheaded, but then each institution can do other things with it, right? So that's the exciting aspect too, that it will change also as it moves to other communities, other cities. Detroit has its own really fascinating history in relation to African-American music, but also gentrification and car production, for example. So there are so many layers that probably will come out through an exhibition like this that are localized, where the respective museum is taking that on to shape.
It would be really fascinating to capture all of that and keep things like the discussion here and in different places and to make that accessible. Because you're right, it changes.
Yeah. I can also send around, we have like really amazing videos that we created on our YouTube channel. So 3 or 4 videos, and for the exhibitions, I can share links afterwards if you're interested in, that are really fun to watch as well.
Other questions?
Yes. May I jump in? Hi, Doris.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, so I mean, I'm just so fascinated. I think this is such an incredibly important work you're doing. And I think the informational, pedagogical, and other value really cannot be overstated. And in my work on the history of feminist film, I'm very familiar with sort of readapting for new audiences and new concerns, forgotten histories. And, and so I think my question just for you in this case is, how do you deal with this question, with these very charged issues racially? I mean, we're talking here about slavery and, the non-existent identity of groups of people who aren't being taken seriously as artists, as film. I mean, if we really dug into this very deeply, we can carve out these very, very dark stories. So as a curator, and as a museum expert, how do you deal with these issues, especially in a climate of trigger warnings and, cancel culture to a certain extent, and all of these problems that we have communicating about difficult topics. And all of us are, in certain university settings, and certainly from my work, that's always about difficult topics too. I have to think about how am I going to actually open up these stories for people. So what is the mind frame that you go into these questions?
Well, the first mind frame, thank you for this question, Bernadette. It's such an important question. But the first part of my answer is not to shy away to talk about it. I think that's key, to allow ourselves the space to figure out a way to talk about difficult topics. Because I think if we don't talk about them, it just makes it worse. There's a lot of discussion we had of how we shaped the exhibition, between Ria and myself and our assistants, obviously, but also between our leadership at the museum. This exhibition is really part of the larger mission of the Academy Museum, where we decided not to shy away from difficult topics, because film history, as it reflects our culture, is full of it. Our cultures, I should say, plural. And it's kind of important to own that and to be honest about it. And how we decided to go about it in this exhibition in particular was to create, as I mentioned, a gallery that, also to talk about it and set the conversation up through the double consciousness. So that was like one aspect. And there's more in the exhibition where you learn about it, actually, that I didn't show you in the pictures. And to set up this double set, the doubleness in everything you think and do. And it's just not just one thing you have in your life, or your experience of your life. And I think we can learn a lot about that, even, as white, privileged Europeans living and working in America. And so that gave us a way of creating a framework, I think, to tackle difficult topics. We talked a lot about, I remember one story in particular. We knew very early on that we include the birth of a nation. It's the elephant in the room, right? Yeah. And we cannot not include it because it existed. It existed. It's a fact. But then we discussed a lot how we can talk about it. And we talked even more about whether we should show that poster. We show a release poster from the 1920s in the exhibition that visual messaging is very direct and clear to what this film was about, which is white supremacy. It shows a hooded Klansman riding on a horse in a victory pose. And it is a triggering image. It really is. But it made it so clear what that film was.
Yeah.
And then we'll have supporting materials to talk about it, right? And its protest against it, and so on and so forth. And that it was shown in the White House, to learn about that too, that it was officially sanctioned, a film like that, during a time that tells us so much about the political moment in this country at that time. And, sometimes while we were working on it, it really created scary relationships to the present, I should say, too, with January 6th, for example. You know, like there are moments like, oh my God, is this happening again? You know, and then also later on in a gallery, the civil rights movement, obviously. We worked on this exhibition long before the murder of George Floyd, but of course, not before the continued violence against Black people in this country, obviously. So we, you know, but it was before the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, really, that we would all talk about it. So it was, we couldn't have, you know, this exhibition was not a reaction to that, but it was always meant to be, you know, so in a way. And the developments in our culture in this country just maybe sharpened our minds a little bit more, and maybe also allowed wider discourse around it, and maybe even interest.
Other questions? Can I ask something else, Doris? And that is Birth of a Nation, right? It's like we talk about Confederate monuments and statues and to take them down, and there is hardly a more powerful Confederate statue than Birth of a Nation. But we don't really talk about what should happen with that. And it's you, I mean, you wrestled with it as part of the exhibit, right? But larger, sort of as larger society, but also the role that Hollywood played in perpetuating stereotypes, and to this day. So it's really like your exhibit is one step in the direction of how do we perpetuate, how do we shape public discourse, right? An image, like whether it's like Bernadette's working on, right? It's like relates to women, whether it relates to Arabs, to Muslims, to anyone else. It's like, it's how German-speaking people are portrayed, always as Nazis, right? It's sort of what, it's like the reckoning here, the reflection too, is like, likewise, it's like how Hollywood, is like, just to use that umbrella term, is happy to export our movies, our television series without any further thought of how they're received around the world, right? And clash with other cultures and religions. So it's such an interesting question, really. It's like, and if the museum can see itself being the arbiter of some of those conversations.
Yeah, we are.
But are there any plans? Is it something you guys are thinking about?
Oh yeah, 100%. And we have been before we opened, and as soon as the doors opened. I remember our first panel discussion, public panel discussion at the museum we opened end of September, was on October 1st or 2nd, like the day after, you know, the big evening parties. We had a panel discussion with our now director, Jacqueline Stewart, myself, and two members of our Inclusion and Advisory Committee, which we have worked with for, I think now 8 years or 7, or a long time now. I forgot exactly how long, before the opening, who are a group of filmmakers from diverse backgrounds. Started out as a small group of 5 people and now we are a group of 25. It's a group of 25 people. They helped us to discuss these topics. They helped us to see themes from different angles. They helped us to address blind spots that anybody has, everybody has, right? We all have them. But I found it really important, and as in terms of life experience too, and not just as a museum professional, but as a person in life, to be able to have difficult conversations. And believe me, those conversations with our Inclusion and Advisory Committee were really difficult sometimes. But we all were in this together, and we knew we want to do this and engage in difficult conversations together in order to offer our public moments of contextualizations, moments of thought, moments of realization and discussion. And so that is built into the mission of the museum. And I'm really proud of that and happy about that, that's the case. And so, yeah, to your question, that was our first public statement to have this panel discussion. The cinema was full and people loved it. And, so you can see that people are hungry for our conversations. They really are. And, we all love entertainment, and I do too, and but it's also really important to recognize and acknowledge that whatever we consume, whether, as a fun thing in the evening or for work, it shapes us. And so to work with cinema and about cinema is just a beautiful platform where we can talk about that.
And it shapes us subconsciously. Yes.
Correct.
I have one more little just note, really, because I happen to know the film I Am Somebody pretty well, and I screen it for my students. This is the first civil rights documentary actually ever made, and it happens to be made by a Black woman. But I know that when it came out, and I know this from the distribution company that gave me this information, when it was finally distributed, which took forever, I mean, it was a completely forgotten piece, as I'm sure you know, they actually labeled it as Margaret Anderson sort of being part of this demonstration, and really not labeling her as a filmmaker behind it. And she was very offended by it. And I think she's still alive. So I'm wondering did you invite her by any chance to speak about her film and to give voice to this situation?
Yes. So Madeleine Anderson is 95 now, I think.
Yes.
She lives in Brooklyn. And my co-curator, Ria, has worked with her very closely. She did an oral history with her a few years ago. She was not able to come out to the exhibition because she doesn't want to go fly anymore. So that's the reason why. But on the the DVD box that where her films are issued, including I'm Somebody and some other films she made, there is this oral history with Ria and Madeleine on it. And she is really happy we have this in our exhibition. We had some of her family members here. Of a younger generation. So, and we have also actually this hat, the paper hats that when people wore during that demonstration. We have it in the exhibition as a loan from her, private loan. So so unfortunately we could not have her in person on site anymore, but we were really fortunate that, I mean, we wanted to include her from day one. We knew that, and
so important.
Yeah, it's really important. She's the only filmmaker who is still alive, actually, from that group that we shall feature in the last gallery.
It's amazing. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say that when I saw the title of the talk and so I was like, oh my God, if I was just thinking if I had to do a project like that, I would be scared to death because, of all the blind spots and because we did not grow up in, with this history. And, we learned about our difficult history, and Americans hopefully, grow up with this history, not anymore in some states now, but so I think that must have been super, super difficult for you also to do that and kind of, I just feel, you did such a great job, and I think you're doing us all proud as Austrians, because I don't think that all Austrians are as reflective, about things. And this is an extremely, extremely difficult topic, in particular in this day and age, I feel. So, chapeau.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. And yes, it was difficult. I agree. But I think the key, and I knew that very early on, I would not want to do a show on my own from my perspective on this topic. I knew that. And so I think it could not, it wouldn't be what it is without an African-American perspective being part of it, and without an outsider perspective being part of it. It's both. Actually. And
I was actually wondering, how did your collaborators react when you reached out to them and so on, as someone who they clearly don't consider as an expert in that topic area, right? In that subject.
Yeah. I have one experience that was fascinating at an institution where I was sitting as the only white person in a table of 5 or 6 other Black curators. And I was so scared, not scared of them, but scared of my own role. Who am I to speak? You know, I can't speak up to this. But I phrased it in a way that I can, to show that and tell them that I know I can speak to this, and I would like to for us to speak together on this topic, and we need your help and support, and we would like to learn. And so I think that was really a humbling moment, but I was received with open arms coming to them with this attitude, you know. And I think that's key, right? It's to understand and acknowledge that we can never have a Black experience, period, because we are not African Americans. And it's also different for, you know, it's different for different cultures, different ethnicities, and different races, the experiences. And we all know it's so charged, you know, every experience here, but in particular, African American experience is so charged because slavery was not taught in the way it should have been taught for a very long time. So, and it all comes back to that. And so I think, long answer to your a nice comment, thank you, Sebastian, is just, I think, to be humble, I think, and to allow yourself to learn at the same time, and not shy away from being curious and wanting to learn, but maybe find the right mode in being able to learn. Because reading books is not enough, I think. I think human experience and interaction is key. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, but let me just follow up on that. Do you think that, I think as a scholar coming from the outside, also to the outside of Black history and Black culture, but also coming from the outside to essentially American culture, for you, do you think that was some sort of an angle for you to approach that topic?
It was, and that we have a European angle in there obviously was me pushing or like suggesting that. I also went to Berlin and found objects there that we probably would not have done if it wasn't for a European perspective to it, which I found interesting. But I also must say, it's interesting that one time I heard a comment from a colleague saying, oh, it's interesting that you're European. If you were American, you probably wouldn't have that attitude, you know, and that was actually an interesting perspective I hadn't thought about. It might be true, you know, because we're also foreigners here. Yes, we are white and appear privileged, and are privileged, but we still have a different perspective than maybe growing up here. And then it also, as we all know, I mean, I don't have to tell you all this, but it also depends on, I mean, race is not the only factor that shapes you. There's also class, there's gender, as you all know. I mean, there's so many other factors that shape us. Yeah. But yeah, interesting point, Dietrich, it's true. I think it made a difference.
Any last questions? Otherwise, this is a beautiful spot for us, Tina, especially to stop.
Just a very quick question. What are you working on right now, or what is your next project going to be?
Yes, my next project is very different than this one, but not different in mindset, but different on the surface. It will be on envisioning possible futures through cyberpunk films, but that includes also films that we would maybe categorize Afrofuturist films and indigenous futurism. So in ways of like, how does cinema allow us to project our future and imagine our futures in different ways, will be an exhibition and a bit more immersive experience that will open in fall of 2024 as part of the PST, Pacific Standard Time Getty initiative.
Thank you very much. We look forward to that, Doris. It is very apropos for us, very important.
Yes.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for everybody who will see this on our YouTube channel at another time. It was really wonderful, Doris. Thank you for walking us through. It was, again, I've seen it twice or 3 times now, I think. And this again sort of showed me different things, and I learned again, it's like how much work and how much thought and how much, like, just incredible, yeah, incredible contribution you made here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.